Story: a struggling farmer lends his horse to a traveler, unaware she's a billionaire seeking true love. The sun rose over Promise Hill with the reluctant grace of a daily mourner. It wasn't a cheerful, golden dawn, but a pale, washed-out light that bleached the color from the sky and illuminated every crack in the parched earth below. The land was a patchwork of stubborn clay and thirsty dust, stitched together with fences that sagged like tired old men. The name Promise Hill had been given by a young couple full of hope a generation ago. Now it felt more like an epitaph. Leo felt the weight of that name every morning. It was in his bones, a dull ache that started in his spine and settled in his heart. At 32, he had his father's gentle eyes and his mother's quiet determination, but the farm had given him hands that looked twice his age, calloused, scarred, and mapped with the fine lines of relentless labor. His first stop, as always, was the barn. The air inside was cool and smelled of sweet hay, aging wood, and the warm, earthy scent of his only companion. "Morning, old friend," Leo murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. Orion, a handsome bay horse whose coat still held a deep sheen despite his age, lifted his head from the hay manger and nickered softly. His large, dark eyes, intelligent and knowing, fixed on Leo. The bond between them was a silent language spoken in the simple rituals of their shared life. Leo ran a hand down the horse's strong neck, feeling the familiar warmth and the steady thrum of life beneath his palm. Orion wasn't just livestock. He was a legacy, a gift from his father on his 16th birthday. The horse was the last living link to the parents he had lost too soon. "He'll be your legs when you're tired and your courage when you're scared," his father had said, his voice thick with pride. Leo hadn't understood the full meaning then. He did now. Orion had been his steadfast partner through failed crops, brutal winters, and the profound loneliness that had settled over Promise Hill like a permanent fog. "Just you and me, Orion," Leo whispered, picking up a hoof pick. "Always been just you and me." He worked with an unhurried tenderness, checking each hoof, his touch gentle but firm. The horse stood patiently, accustomed to the care. It was in these quiet moments that Leo felt the closest to peace. Here, in the dusty shafts of morning light, the world's demands seemed to fade. There was only the steady rhythm of breathing, the scrape of the pick against iron, and the silent understanding between man and beast. But peace was a luxury, and its lease was always short. After finishing his morning chores, mending a split rail on the paddock fence, and hauling 2 buckets of water from the well, whose handle groaned in protest, Leo walked back to the small farmhouse. It was a simple, sturdy structure his father had built with his own 2 hands. Inside, his mother had made it a home filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of laughter. Now, it was just quiet, clean, but quiet. On the worn wooden kitchen table lay an envelope. It was crisp, white, and official looking. It had arrived 2 days ago, and Leo had let it sit there. An unwelcome guest he didn't have the energy to entertain. He knew what it was. It was the 3rd one in as many months, each one more severe than the last. He finally picked it up, his thumb tracing the embossed seal of the county bank. With a deep breath, he tore it open. The formal, impersonal words seemed to leap off the page, cold and sharp. "Further to our previous correspondence. Outstanding balance. Failure to meet repayment terms. This letter serves as final notice. Should the overdue amount not be settled in full within 30 days from the date of this letter, the bank will be forced to commence foreclosure proceedings on the property known as 114 Promise Hill Road." The paper trembled in his hand. 30 days. A knot tightened in his chest. He looked out the window at the land stretching before him. He didn't see the stubborn clay or the wilting cornstalks. He saw his mother planting a rosebush by the porch, its phantom scent filling his memory. He saw his father, strong and smiling, teaching a young Leo how to ride Orion in the main paddock. This wasn't just a plot of land. It was the repository of every memory he held dear. It was his entire world. And a piece of paper on his kitchen table was threatening to wipe it all away. He folded the letter with methodical precision and tucked it into the back pocket of his jeans, the sharp edges pressing against him like a physical pain. He couldn't afford to despair. Despair didn't fix fences or pay bills. He grabbed his tools and headed out toward the property line he shared with his only neighbor, where a section of fence had been damaged in the last storm. He was halfway through wrapping new wire around a post when a gravelly voice cut through the air. Still patching up this old wreck, Leo? Leo didn't need to turn around. He knew that voice. Mr. Gable was a man weathered not by sun, but by cynicism. He was short, stout, and farmed his own land with a grim efficiency that left no room for sentiment. "Morning, Mr. Gable," Leo said, not breaking his rhythm. Gable leaned against the shared fence post on his side, chewing on a piece of straw. "Heard from the bank yet?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Leo's hands stilled for a second. News traveled fast in the country, even bad news. "I'm handling it," he said, his voice tight. "Handling it?" Gable scoffed, spitting the straw onto the ground. "Son, your father was a dreamer. A good man, but a dreamer. He named this place Promise Hill. Promise of what? Backbreaking work and debt? Look, there's a developer sniffing around the valley, offering good money, real money, not promise money. Sell this place. Get yourself a clean start in the city. A man your age shouldn't be tied to a ghost." Every word was a small, sharp jab at the foundation of Leo's life. He knew Gable didn't mean to be cruel. He was just practical. To him, land was an asset, a line item on a balance sheet. To Leo, it was a sacred trust. He finally turned to face his neighbor, his gaze steady. "It was their home, Mr. Gable. It's my home now. Some things are worth more than what a developer is willing to pay." Gable shook his head with a sigh that was a mix of pity and exasperation. That kind of thinking is what lands a man with nothing but a pretty view of his own failure. "You can't eat memories, Leo. And that horse of yours," he said, nodding toward the barn, "he can't plow a field fast enough to outrun a foreclosure notice. He's a pet, not an asset." With that parting shot, Gable turned and trudged back toward his own perfectly maintained, brutally efficient property. Leo stood alone, the silence rushing back in. He looked down at his hands, at the wire he was twisting into place. Gable's words echoed in his mind, mingling with the cold, hard text of the bank letter. 30 days. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that he was the last man on earth, holding on to a belief that the rest of the world had long since discarded. He looked up at the pale sky, a silent question forming on his lips. He was a good man. He worked hard. He honored his parents. Why wasn't that enough? A soft nicker carried on the breeze from the barn. A gentle summons. Leo let out a long, slow breath and turned his back on Gable's property line. He walked toward the sound, toward the one being on earth who asked for nothing but offered everything. As he entered the cool shade of the barn, Orion nudged his shoulder, and for a moment the crushing weight of the land, the debt, and the future lifted, replaced by the simple, unwavering presence of a friend. It was a temporary reprieve, he knew. But for now, it was enough. While Leo was mending fences under a pale country sun, another world away, Isabella Sterling was conquering an empire under the cold blue glare of fluorescent lights. Her kingdom was the 48th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, a glass-walled boardroom that overlooked Central Park like a map of her own dominion. The air was thin, smelling of expensive leather, brewed coffee, and the electric hum of immense wealth changing hands. Isabella sat at the head of a 20-foot obsidian table, a silent queen in a pristine white suit that was less an outfit and more a suit of armor. Across from her, a dozen older men in dark suits, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension, watched as she made the final, decisive pen stroke on a document worth more than the GDP of a small nation. The signature was flawless, an elegant black slash that sealed the deal. A polite yet thunderous applause filled the room. "Brilliant, Isabella. Simply brilliant," said Mr. Davies, the portly chairman of the company she had just acquired. He was trying to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, Charles," Isabella replied, her voice smooth and measured, betraying none of the crushing emptiness she felt. She was a master of this performance. She could project confidence, authority, and even a disarming charm, all while her inner world was a silent, echoing void. Her fiancé, Julian Croft, stepped behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. He was a man who looked as though he had been sculpted from a magazine cover, perfect teeth, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that held a calculated warmth. He squeezed her shoulders, a public display of proprietary pride. "My brilliant Isabella," he murmured, his voice loud enough for the room to hear. "I've already booked a table at Per Se to celebrate." She offered a small, practiced smile. That's lovely, Julian. To everyone in that room, they were the ultimate power couple. Isabella Sterling, the self-made billionaire with the Midas touch, and Julian Croft, the handsome heir to a real estate dynasty. Their upcoming wedding was being called the merger of the decade by society columnists. And that, Isabella was beginning to realize, was the most honest thing anyone had ever said about them. Their relationship felt less like a romance and more like a meticulously planned corporate synergy. Later that evening, the celebration was in full swing. The restaurant was a hushed temple of gastronomy, where each plate was a work of art and the bill was an act of violence. Isabella moved through the evening on autopilot, accepting congratulations, nodding at pleasantries, and sipping champagne that tasted like sparkling dust. She felt like a ghost at her own feast. Julian was in his element, holding court, his arm possessively around her waist, recounting the brilliance of her strategy to anyone who would listen. He was selling her, packaging her accomplishments as part of their shared brand. She excused herself, needing a moment of quiet. She found a small, secluded balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape. The cool night air was a welcome relief. The city below was a web of light and energy, a place of infinite possibility, yet she had never felt more trapped. She was about to go back inside when she heard Julian's voice from just around the corner, speaking on his phone. His tone was different now, conspiratorial, unguarded. No, it was a masterpiece, he was saying. She gutted them and they thanked her for it. The Sterling brand is stronger than ever. Yes, the wedding will cement everything. It's not just a marriage, Mark. It's the ultimate merger. Croft Real Estate and Sterling Capital. The synergy is off the charts. Think of the access, the power, a dynasty. Isabella froze, her hand gripping the cold iron of the railing. Is she in love with me? Julian laughed, a low, dismissive sound that cut her to the bone. She loves the idea of a partner, someone to stand beside her. She's an asset, Mark. A beautiful, brilliant, untouchable asset. My job is to manage the asset. And believe me, the dividends will be extraordinary. The words weren't just words. They were stones, and they struck her with a physical force. Asset, merger, dividends. The cold, transactional language of her boardroom had invaded the last space she had tried to keep sacred. There was a silent, catastrophic shattering inside her. All her doubts, all the gnawing feelings of being a commodity, all the loneliness she tried to bury under success, it all coalesced into a single, brutal truth. He didn't love her. He didn't even see her. He saw a stock portfolio with a pretty face. She didn't move. She waited until his footsteps faded, then she walked back into the restaurant, her face a perfect, serene mask. She picked up her champagne flute, met Julian's triumphant gaze from across the room, and gave him a small, cryptic smile. He smiled back, oblivious. He had just successfully closed the most important deal of his life. He had no idea he had just lost everything. She left the party an hour later, pleading exhaustion. The moment the door to her penthouse apartment closed behind her, the mask dissolved. The apartment was a monument to modern minimalism, all white walls, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city like a piece of art. It was a space designed to be admired, not lived in. A beautiful, gilded cage. For a long moment, she stood in the center of the vast living room, the silence pressing in on her. Then, with a sudden, decisive clarity, she began to move. She went into her cavernous walk-in closet, a room larger than most city apartments. She walked past rows of designer dresses, past shelves of expensive heels, past drawers of silk and cashmere. She pulled out a dusty duffel bag from the very back. She then unzipped the Tom Ford suit she was wearing the armor and let it fall to the floor in a heap of white fabric. She stripped off the diamond earrings, the pearl necklace, the suffocating persona of Isabella Sterling. She dressed in clothes she hadn't worn in years, a pair of sturdy, comfortable jeans, a simple cotton t-shirt, and a pair of hiking boots she'd bought on a whim but never used. She went to her safe, but didn't take the jewelry or the stock certificates. She took out a thick wad of cash and a simple, worn, leather-bound book from her childhood. It was a collection of folk tales, its cover softened with age. Her favorite story had been about a brave girl named Belle, who left a castle to find adventure in the real world. She walked back into her bedroom and twisted the massive diamond engagement ring from her finger. It felt foreign and heavy. She placed it on the polished bedside table, next to a single sheet of her expensive monogram stationery. She picked up a pen, and in the same elegant script that had sealed a $1 billion deal just hours before, she wrote only 5 words. "I went to find something real." She left the note beside the ring, a silent testament to the transaction's end. She didn't look back. She took the service elevator down to the garage, bypassing the doorman and her driver. She got into an anonymous, nondescript sedan, one of a fleet she owned but never used personally, and programmed the navigation system with a single instruction: east. No destination. No plan. As she drove through the Lincoln Tunnel, the glittering skyline of Manhattan receded in her rearview mirror. It looked like a handful of scattered jewels, beautiful but cold and hard. For the first time in a decade, she was not Isabella Sterling, the CEO. She was not Julian Croft's fiancée. She was just a woman in a car, driving east into the vast, terrifying, and wonderfully unknown darkness. She was tired of being an asset. She was going to try for once in her life to just be Belle. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt a flicker of something that wasn't emptiness. It was fear, yes, but tangled within it was the unmistakable, thrilling whisper of hope. For 3 days, Belle drove. The relentless eastward direction eventually brought her to winding country roads that seemed to shed civilization with every mile. The sleek sedan, so anonymous in the city, was now a conspicuous alien on these sun-baked lanes. The concrete and steel of her past were replaced by endless fields of green and gold, broken only by the occasional weathered barn leaning against the sky. The hum of the city was replaced by the drone of insects and the rustle of wind through tall grass. It was a world she had only ever seen from the window of a private jet. She drove until the names on the road signs became unfamiliar, then irrelevant. She wasn't running to a place. She was running from a state of being. The cash she'd taken paid for anonymous motel rooms and greasy diner food. She spoke to no one, and no one spoke to her. She was invisible, and it was the most liberating feeling she'd ever known. On the afternoon of the 4th day, the car sputtered. Belle frowned, tapping the gas pedal. The engine coughed, whined, and then fell silent. She coasted to the side of the deserted road, a plume of dust settling behind her. She turned the key. Nothing. A second time. A faint, pathetic click was the only response. The fuel gauge, she now noticed, was on empty. In a life where every detail was managed by an assistant, the simple act of refueling a car had been completely overlooked. She got out and slammed the door, the sound startlingly loud in the immense quiet. She was surrounded by nothing but fields and a heat that shimmered above the asphalt. The sun was a hammer, beating down relentlessly. There were no buildings in sight, no other cars, no signs of life. For the first time on her journey, her liberating anonymity tipped into genuine, frightening isolation. She checked her phone. No signal. Of course. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. It was the same helplessness she'd felt on the balcony, but this time there was no escape. Here, her name meant nothing. Her bank account was useless. She was just a woman, stranded. Julian's mocking words echoed in her mind. My job is to manage the asset. She had been managed, protected, and curated for so long that she had forgotten how to function in the real, unmanaged world. After a moment of frozen indecision, she did the only thing she could. She started to walk. Her hiking boots, pristine until now, kicked up clouds of dust. Sweat trickled down her back, plastering the thin t-shirt to her skin. The heat was oppressive. After what felt like an hour, a shape began to materialize through the haze in the distance. It wasn't a town, but a small, solitary farmhouse, perched atop a gentle rise. It looked humble, almost broken, but it was a sign of life, an oasis. As she drew closer, she could see a man working near a fence line. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion that spoke of long acquaintance with physical labor. He was tall and lean, dressed in faded jeans and a worn shirt. He wasn't imposing, yet there was a stillness about him, a rootedness that seemed to connect him to the very land he stood upon. Belle's throat was dry, her voice a rasp when she finally reached him. "Excuse me, sir?" Leo looked up. His work on the fence halted. His eyes, a surprisingly gentle shade of blue, held no suspicion, only a flicker of concern. He saw a woman whose clothes, though simple, were too clean for this dusty world, and whose face was a mask of exhaustion and barely concealed panic. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice cracking. "My car, it's broken down, back on the main road. I think I'm out of gas." He didn't say a word at first. He simply unhooked a battered metal canteen from his belt and held it out to her. "Here," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Drink this. You look like you've walked a long way." The water was cool and tasted of metal and earth, the most refreshing thing she had ever tasted. She drank gratefully, the simple act of charity easing the tight knot of fear in her chest. "Thank you," she managed, handing it back. "The town. Is it far?" Leo nodded slowly, his gaze drifting down the road she'd come from. "A good half-day's walk from here. It'll be dark in a few hours. Not a walk you want to be making alone." Belle's heart sank. A half day. Is there any other way? A bus? A taxi service? She heard the entitlement in her own voice and winced. He gave a small, almost sad shake of his head. "Not out here. We're a little off the beaten path." He looked at her, then his gaze shifted toward the barn, where a handsome bay horse stood grazing peacefully in the paddock. Belle followed his gaze. In the silence that followed, she could almost see the gears turning in his mind. She saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, a brief, intense debate that he seemed to be having with himself. She didn't know he was weighing the survival of his home against the plight of a stranger. She didn't know he was thinking of the foreclosure notice in his pocket, its sharp edges a constant reminder of his precarity. All she saw was a man looking at his horse with a deep, abiding affection. Then his eyes met hers again. The conflict resolved. His expression was one of quiet resignation, as if he were bowing to a principle larger than his own self-interest. "I don't have a car," Leo said. "But I have Orion. He's gentle, and he knows the way to town like the back of my hand. You can take him." The offer hung in the air, so simple and so monumental that Belle couldn't process it at first. She looked from the man's earnest, weary face to the beautiful horse. In her world, assets of this value weren't lent. They were leased, insured, and governed by ironclad contracts. "Your horse?" she stammered, stunned. "But you must need him. For the farm." She gestured vaguely at the fields around them. I don't have anything to pay you with. Not right now." A small, kind smile touched Leo's lips, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. "Kindness isn't something you pay for," he said simply. The words struck Belle with the force of a revelation. In her entire life, had anyone ever said something so pure to her? Just, "Promise me you'll take good care of him, and bring him back when you can. That's all the payment I need." He led her to the barn, his movements patient and sure as he saddled the horse. He showed her how to hold the reins, how to guide Orion with a gentle touch rather than force. His hands, though rough and calloused, were incredibly gentle as he adjusted the stirrups for her. He was entrusting his most precious possession to a complete stranger, and his only collateral was a promise. As Belle awkwardly mounted Orion, feeling clumsy and out of place, she looked down at Leo. For the first time, she truly saw him, a man of quiet dignity, standing on a patch of struggling land, offering his livelihood to help someone he didn't know. The sheer, uncalculated generosity of the act was staggering. It was the most real thing she had encountered in years. "I will," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "I promise. I'll take the best care of him." Leo just nodded, stepping back and giving Orion a final, fond pat on the neck. "He'll look after you." As she urged Orion forward, down the dusty track leading away from Promise Hill, she turned back one last time. Leo was still standing there, a solitary figure watching them go, growing smaller and smaller against the vast, indifferent landscape. He was watching his last best hope walk away, and she was riding it, a woman who had everything and nothing, toward a town she didn't know, feeling an unfamiliar mix of profound guilt and burgeoning, inexplicable hope. The gilded cage had been left behind, but she was only just beginning to understand the cost of real freedom. Leo stood and watched until the figures of the woman and his horse were swallowed by the curve of the road and the shimmering afternoon heat. The dust they had kicked up settled slowly, returning the world to its familiar, suffocating stillness. The air, which moments ago had been filled with the weight of decision, now felt hollow, eerily empty. He could no longer hear the soft crunch of Orion's grazing or the occasional swish of his tail. The silence left behind was a physical presence, a void where his friend used to be. He turned back to the fence, his tools lying where he dropped them. The familiar task, usually a source of meditative calm, now felt pointless and overwhelming. A profound sense of dread, cold and heavy, began to seep into his bones. What have I done? The question was a frantic whisper in the back of his mind. He had just handed his livelihood, his legacy, and his only companion over to a complete stranger. A woman with soft hands and panicked eyes. A woman who seemed as alien to this land as the sleek, broken-down car she'd abandoned. He didn't even know her real name. Belle. It sounded like something from a storybook, flimsy and unreal. He tried to push the feeling down. He had done the right thing. His mother's voice echoed from a distant memory. There's never a wrong time to be kind, Leo. The world has enough fences. Be a gate. He had always tried to live by that. But his mother had never had a final notice from the bank pressing against her skin. The next morning, the reality of his choice hit him with the force of a physical blow. The sun rose, and for the first time in 16 years, Orion was not there to greet him. The barn felt cavernous and cold. The empty stall was an accusation. Without the horse, the farm's most vital engine was gone. The small plot of land he'd been hoping to plow for a late-season cash crop was now just a rectangle of hard, unforgiving dirt. But despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. He would do it by hand. He found the old hand tiller in the back of the barn, its wooden handles smooth and dark from his father's grip. It was a relic, a tool for a time before even Orion. He dragged it out to the field, the metal blade scarring the earth behind him. The work was brutal. The sun beat down, and the clay soil fought him for every inch. He pushed with his legs, his back screaming in protest, his shoulder muscles bunching into tight burning knots. Sweat poured into his eyes, stinging them. After an hour, he had managed to turn over a patch of earth no bigger than a tabletop. He leaned on the tiller, gasping for breath, his body trembling with exertion. This wasn't farming. It was a battle of attrition against the land itself, and he was losing. He kept at it for hours, fueled by a desperate, stubborn refusal to admit defeat. It was during a short break, as he sat wiping his brow with the back of a dirty glove, that Mr. Gable's truck rumbled to a stop on the road beside the field. His neighbor leaned out the window, a look of smug pity on his face. "Still playing Pioneer, Leo?" Gable asked, his voice laced with scorn. He gestured with his chin toward the pathetic-looking patch of tilled earth. "At this rate, you'll be ready to plant by next spring." Leo didn't answer, just took a long drink from his canteen. Gable wasn't finished. "Word is you gave your horse away. Just gave it to some woman whose car ran out of gas. A pretty face, I hear." He shook his head, a theatrical display of disbelief. "Your father? He worked his fingers to the bone for this place. I wonder what he'd think, seeing you give away your only real asset for a smile. You're a fool, son. A kind-hearted, sentimental fool, and the world eats fools like you for breakfast." Each word was a stone, hitting the already bruised surface of Leo's resolve. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, to explain the look in the woman's eyes, the bone-deep exhaustion that had compelled him to act. But he knew it would be useless. Gable saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, profit and loss. Kindness was not on his balance sheet. "I did what I thought was right," Leo said, his voice low and hoarse from dust and fatigue. "Right doesn't pay the bank, Leo," Gable retorted, before putting his truck in gear and driving off, leaving a cloud of self-righteous dust in his wake. Leo was left alone again, the silence now filled with the echo of Gable's derision. The doubt, which had been a whisper, now became a roar. Was he a fool? Had he sacrificed his home, his parents' dream, for a fleeting moment of misplaced chivalry? The woman could be halfway to the next state by now. The horse sold for quick cash. He had no way of knowing. He had only a promise from a stranger. And in this harsh, unforgiving world, what was a promise truly worth? He worked until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His body was a symphony of aches. He trudged back to the quiet farmhouse, his spirit as weary as his muscles. He washed his face and hands at the kitchen sink, the cold water doing little to soothe the fire in his shoulders. As he was staring blankly at the meager contents of his pantry, wondering if he had the energy to cook, there was a soft knock on the back door. He opened it to find Mrs. Gable standing on his porch. She was a small, bird-like woman with kind eyes that held an apology for her husband's harshness. In her hands, she held a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "My husband has a tongue like a thorny branch, Leo," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "He doesn't mean half of what he says, and the other half he's just plain wrong about." She pushed the basket into his hands. "I made too much pot roast." Leo looked down at the basket. The rich, savory smell of the roast, potatoes, and carrots filled the air. It was the smell of home, of care. It was more than he'd had in days. "Mrs. Gable, you didn't have to," he started, his throat tight with emotion. "Hush now," she interrupted gently, finally looking up at him. Her gaze was steady and full of a quiet strength. "Kindness is never a mistake, son. It's a seed. You plant it, and you don't always know when or where it will sprout, but it always does. Don't you let my husband's sour heart poison yours." She gave his arm a quick, maternal pat and then bustled off into the twilight before he could thank her properly. Leo brought the basket inside and sat down at his kitchen table. He ate the meal slowly, each bite a balm to his aching body and bruised spirit. Mrs. Gable's small act of defiance, of secret solidarity, was a lifeline. It was a reminder that even in the shadow of cynicism, decency could still exist. It didn't solve his problems. The bank notice was still in his pocket, the field was still untilled, and Orion was still gone, but it shored up his faith. That night, and for the next several nights, he sat on his porch, watching the empty road stretch out into the darkness. The moon rose, a silver sliver in the inky sky. With each passing day, the hope that Belle would return with Orion dwindled, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. He would replay their conversation, searching her face in his memory for any sign of deceit, any hint that he had misjudged her. He was caught in an uneasy stillness, a limbo of waiting. He had placed his entire world on a bet on the character of a stranger. Now all he could do was wait to see if he had won, or if, as Mr. Gable had so bluntly put it, he was about to lose everything. The first few hours of the ride were a testament to Belle's complete detachment from the physical world. The saddle leather creaked under her inexperienced weight, and the gentle, swaying motion of Orion's walk felt unnatural and clumsy. She held the reins in a white-knuckled grip, as if she were steering a complex piece of machinery she was terrified of breaking. In her life, transportation had always been a passive experience, a chauffeured car, a first-class seat on a plane. This was different. This was a partnership, and she had no idea how to be a partner. Orion, however, was a patient teacher. He seemed to sense her anxiety, his pace remaining slow and steady, his gait sure-footed on the uneven road. When she pulled the reins too tight out of nervousness, he would simply stop and wait, his head cocked as if to ask, "Are we quite done with that?" When she held them too loose, he would follow the curve of the road with an ingrained intelligence, guided by a memory older than her own. He was not a vehicle. He was a living, breathing being, and he was communicating with her in a language of subtle shifts in weight and gentle nudges of his head. Gradually, tentatively, Belle began to listen. She loosened her grip, tried to sync her posture with his rhythm, and started to trust him. As her fears subsided, she began to notice the world around her for the first time. She saw the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves of ancient oak trees, dappling the road in patterns of light and shadow. She heard the call of a distant hawk, a piercing cry in the vast blue sky. She smelled the sweet, cloying scent of honeysuckle growing wild on a fence line. These were details her previous life had no room for, sensory inputs that were filtered out by tinted windows and climate-controlled environments. Here, they were everything. The world was vibrant, alive, and speaking a language she was only just beginning to learn. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the fields, the distant lights of a small town appeared on the horizon. It was exactly where Leo had said it would be. The sense of relief was immense, followed immediately by a fresh wave of responsibility. She wasn't just here to save herself. She had to care for the creature who had carried her. The town, named Harmony Creek, was little more than a main street with a handful of storefronts, a general store, a diner, a post office, and a small, two-story building with a neatly painted sign that read The Willow Inn. It looked clean and welcoming. Belle dismounted, her legs feeling wobbly and unused, and led Orion toward a public water trough near the town square. While Orion drank deeply, a woman with a kind, weathered face and flower on her apron stepped out of the inn. "That's a fine-looking horse you've got there," she said, her voice warm. "Thank you," Belle replied. "He's not mine, I'm just borrowing him." The admission felt important. "Is there a stable nearby, or a place I could board him for the night?" The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, the innkeeper, pointed to a small, clean-looking barn behind the inn. "You can use ours. We don't get many guests on horseback these days, but we keep a stall ready just in case. My son, Ben, will help you get him settled." Over the next hour, Belle experienced another series of firsts. Guided by Ben, a quiet teenager with his mother's kind eyes, she learned how to unsaddle a horse, how to brush him down to remove the dust and sweat of the road, and how to fill a manger with fresh hay. The physical work was grounding. The simple act of caring for another being, of meeting its basic needs for food, water, and shelter, gave her a sense of purpose that felt more real than any business deal she had ever closed. She ran her hand along Orion's neck, just as she had seen Leo do, and was rewarded with a soft, contented nicker. That night, she took a room at the inn. It was simple, with a handmade quilt on the bed and floral wallpaper, but it was the most comfortable room she had slept in years. The next morning, she asked Martha about a mechanic. The town's only one, she learned, had retired 2 years ago. The nearest was in a larger town, another 20 miles away. "I could call my cousin to give you a lift," Martha offered. "But what about the horse?" The question stopped Belle. Her original frantic plan had been to get to a town, fix her car, and what? Drive off again into the unknown? But now there was Orion. She had made a promise. She couldn't just abandon him. "I need to get him back to his owner," Belle said, the words solidifying her new purpose. "It's important." She decided to stay another day. That afternoon, she saw Ben struggling to repair a section of broken fence at the back of the inn's property. He was trying to stretch a new wire, his lanky frame lacking the leverage to pull it taut. On an impulse, Belle walked over. "Need a hand?" she asked. Ben looked up, surprised. No, Mom. I can manage." "It looks like a two-person job," she insisted, picking up a pair of pliers from his toolbox. "Tell me what to do." For the next hour, they worked together in a comfortable silence, broken only by Ben's quiet instructions. Belle pulled the wire while he stapled it to the posts. Her hands, accustomed to holding pens and smartphones, became dirty and scraped. She got a splinter in her thumb and didn't even care. When they were finished, they stood back to admire the tight, straight line of the new fence. "Thanks, ma'am," Ben said, a genuine shy smile on his face. "I couldn't have done it that straight by myself." A feeling of deep, uncomplicated satisfaction washed over Belle. She had contributed. She had created something, however small, with her own two hands. It was a feeling of value that had nothing to do with her net worth. That night, unable to sleep, she walked out to the barn. The moon was high and bright, casting a silver glow over the quiet town. She slipped inside, the air cool and smelling of hay. Orion was standing peacefully in his stall. She let herself in, not to ride him, but just to be with him. She took a brush from the wall and began to stroke his coat in long, slow movements. The rhythmic motion was meditative. As she worked, she thought about Leo. She pictured his calloused hands, his kind eyes, his quiet dignity. He was a man who owned so little, yet he had given so much, without hesitation. He hadn't asked for a deposit or a contract. He had asked for a promise. He had trusted her. Her entire life had been built on a foundation of distrust. She vetted business partners, ran background checks, and relied on teams of lawyers to protect her from deceit. She had assumed the world was a transactional, predatory place because that was the only part of it she had ever inhabited. Julian's betrayal had been the ultimate confirmation of her cynical worldview. But Leo had shattered that worldview with a single act of selfless generosity. He had treated her not as an asset to be managed or a mark to be exploited, but simply as a human being in need. He had shown her a different way to exist. Leaning against Orion's warm side under the silent watch of the moon, Belle finally understood. Her journey wasn't about finding a place. It was about becoming a person worthy of the trust a man like Leo could offer. She wasn't just Belle the traveler anymore. She was Isabella Sterling. And for the first time, she knew what she had to do with the power that name held. She would keep her promise. She would return his horse. But she would do more than that. She would return to his world not as a weary traveler taking something, but as a grateful friend, ready to give something back. Her search for something real was over. She had found it in the quiet strength of a farmer and the unwavering trust of his horse. The end of the 30-day period loomed over Promise Hill like a gathering storm. Each sunrise brought Leo a fresh wave of quiet panic. He had fallen into a grim routine: rise before dawn, choke down a breakfast he didn't taste, and throw himself into the punishing, futile labor of working the farm alone. The small patch of tilled earth was a testament to his stubbornness, but it was also a monument to his folly. It would yield nothing in time to matter. Hope was a dwindling resource, more precious and scarce than water. 1 week before the deadline, the storm broke. It arrived not as a letter, but in the form of a county-issued sedan that crunched up his gravel driveway. A man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit stepped out, carrying a clipboard and an air of weary authority. He was Mr. Henderson from the bank's foreclosure department, a man whose job was to be the bearer of final bad news. "Leo Miller?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Leo simply nodded, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. His heart hammered against his ribs. As per the final notice issued on the 15th of last month, Henderson began, his voice flat and rehearsed. "The grace period for the outstanding loan on this property expires in 7 days. I'm here to post the official notice of foreclosure auction." He produced a laminated sign from his car, a bright, aggressive red and a hammer. He walked over to the main gate post, the one his father had set in the ground 35 years ago. Leo stood frozen, watching as the man hammered the sign into the wood. The sharp, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the hammer was the sound of his world ending. Each strike was a nail in the coffin of his parents' dream. Notice of public foreclosure auction. The words were stark, brutal, and public. A declaration of his failure for all to see. "The auction is scheduled for the 28th, Henderson said, avoiding Leo's gaze. "You have until then to settle the full amount. Otherwise, you'll need to vacate the property by the end of the month." "I'm sorry, son. It's just business." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving Leo alone with the scarlet stain on his front gate. Leo stared at the sign, his vision blurring. He felt a profound, hollow emptiness, a despair so deep it was almost peaceful. He had tried, he had worked, he had sacrificed, he had held on to his principles. And for what? For this. For a red sign that announced his defeat to the world. Mr. Gable had been right. The world ate fools for breakfast, and he had been served up on a platter. He walked past the sign and into the barn. He sat on an old hay bale in Orion's empty stall, the scent of his friend, a ghostly presence in the air. For the first time since his parents had passed, Leo put his head in his hands and let the silence of the empty barn absorb his grief. He hadn't just lost a farm. He had lost his connection to his past and his hope for the future. Miles away, in the small town of Harmony Creek, Isabella Sterling was undergoing her own profound transformation. After her nighttime epiphany in the barn, she had woken with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Her purpose was no longer a vague, romantic notion of finding something real. It was a concrete, actionable plan. She spent the day talking to Martha, the innkeeper, and other townspeople at the diner. She didn't introduce herself as a billionaire. She was just Belle, a curious traveler. She listened to their stories, stories of pride and struggle, of community and hardship. She learned about the local dairy that had closed down, the young families moving away for better jobs, and the grant program that was their last best hope for revitalizing the town's small-scale agriculture. It was in the local newspaper, a thin, 4-page weekly, that she found the final piece of the puzzle. A front-page article announced that the Rural Heritage Grant, the very program everyone was counting on, had been officially defunded by the state due to budget cuts. The article featured a photo of the town's mayor, a man named George, his face a portrait of weary disappointment. Reading the article, Isabella felt a surge of cold, familiar anger. It was the same anger she felt in boardrooms when faced with inefficiency and short-sightedness. But this time, it was personal. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They were the lives of people who had shown her kindness. People like Martha and Ben. They were people like Leo. The world she came from, with its billion-dollar mergers and abstract financial instruments, had the power to save places like this with the stroke of a pen. But that world was too busy counting its gold to notice the fields lying fallow. That afternoon, she checked into a slightly more upscale hotel in the next town over one with a reliable internet connection. The Belle persona was set aside. She was Isabella Sterling now, and she was going to work. Her first call was to her personal banker in New York. "Michael, it's Isabella. Miss Sterling, we were so worried. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Michael. I need you to do something for me. Liquidate the Sterling Petrov portfolio. All of it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Miss Sterling, that's a significant portion of your liquid assets. Over 9 figures. May I ask?" "You may not," she cut in, her voice calm but steel hard. "Just do it. And I need a portion of the funds wired to a new holding account by morning." Her next calls were a whirlwind of logistics. She arranged for a top-tier equine veterinarian to meet her in Harmony Creek to give Orion a full checkup. She commissioned a custom-made leather saddle from a master craftsman, one designed for comfort on long rides, and had it rush delivered. She hired a luxury equine transport service, the kind used for million-dollar racehorses, to be on standby. Her final call was to her legal team. "I'm establishing a new foundation," she told them, pacing the hotel room. "It will be called the Promise Hill Foundation. Its mission is to provide private grants, equipment, and logistical support to small, family-owned farms. I'm providing the initial seed funding. I want the paperwork drawn up immediately." She was no longer running from her old life. She was repurposing it. She was taking the immense power she had accumulated and aiming it like a cannon at the problems the world chose to ignore. The cynicism that had poisoned her was being burned away by the heat of this new mission. 2 days later, everything was in place. Orion, pronounced to be in excellent health by the vet, was loaded carefully into the climate-controlled trailer. Belle, now Isabella once more, dressed in a simple but elegant traveling suit, climbed into the back of a black luxury sedan that had been delivered for her. She gave the driver the address for Promise Hill. As they pulled out of Harmony Creek, she looked back at the small town that had become the unlikely catalyst for her reinvention. She had arrived there lost, and she was leaving with a map. Not a map of roads, but a map of purpose. She knew Leo would be waiting. He might be angry. He might be hurt by her long absence. He might have even given up hope. But she was coming to keep her promise. And she was bringing with her not just his horse, but a harvest he could never have imagined. The day the black car appeared, Leo was sitting on his porch steps, staring at nothing. The sun was high, the air thick with the promise of another uselessly hot afternoon. He had given up. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind a brittle, hollow shell. The foreclosure sign on his gatepost seemed to mock him, its bright red a wound against the dusty landscape. He had spent the morning sorting through his parents' belongings, deciding what few items he could carry with him into a future he couldn't bear to imagine. He heard the sound first, a low, powerful hum, completely alien to the sputtering engines and rattling pickups of his world. He looked up, his eyes weary, and saw it cresting the hill. It was a long, impossibly sleek black sedan, gleaming as if it had just driven out of a showroom, followed by an equally pristine enclosed horse trailer. They moved with a silent, imposing grace, consuming the dusty road as they approached. Leo got to his feet, a surge of confused adrenaline cutting through his lethargy. His first thought was that it was the developer Mr. Gable had mentioned, come to survey the land they were about to acquire. A bitter, angry bile rose in his throat. They hadn't even waited for the auction. They were vultures, circling before the body was even cold. The convoy pulled to a stop directly in front of his gate, beside the foreclosure sign. The juxtaposition was so cruel, so stark, it felt like a scene from a nightmare, the symbol of his utter failure beside this obscene display of wealth. A uniformed driver stepped out of the sedan, his movements crisp and professional, and opened the rear passenger door. Leo braced himself, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, ready to tell whoever it was to get off his property. But the person who emerged was not a slick, smiling developer. It was a woman. She was tall and poised, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue suit. Her hair was styled in a way that spoke of expensive salons, and her face, though familiar, was transformed by an aura of power and confidence he didn't recognize. He stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. It was her. It was Belle. But it wasn't. The weary, panicked traveler was gone, replaced by this formidable stranger who looked like she owned the world. His confusion curdled into a new, sharper form of betrayal. Was this all some kind of cruel joke? A game for the rich? To see how the other half lives before snatching their homes away? Before he could speak, before he could unleash the torrent of angry questions storming in his head, the driver moved to the back of the trailer. He unlatched the heavy ramp, lowering it to the ground with a soft hydraulic hiss. And then, a sound cut through Leo's anger, a sound that bypassed his brain and went straight to his heart. A familiar, beloved nicker. A horse walked down the ramp, his hooves clopping softly on the metal. It was Orion. Leo's breath caught in his chest. It was his Orion, but somehow more. His coat shone with a deep, healthy luster. His muscles looked stronger, more defined. He moved with a renewed energy, his head held high. For a breathtaking moment, Leo forgot the woman, forgot the car, forgot the red sign on his gate. All he saw was his friend. Orion, he breathed, the name a prayer. The horse's ears pricked up. He saw Leo, and with a joyful whinny that echoed across the silent farm, he broke into a trot, heading straight for him. The driver made a move to intercept him, but Isabella held up a hand, stopping him. Orion reached Leo and pushed his head hard against his chest, a gesture of pure, unadulterated affection. Leo wrapped his arms around the horse's strong neck, burying his face in his mane, inhaling the familiar, earthy scent he thought he'd lost forever. All the tension, the anger, the despair of the past weeks melted away in a hot rush of relief, leaving him weak-kneed and trembling. "You came back," Leo whispered into the horse's ear. "You came back." Only when the initial, overwhelming wave of emotion subsided did he straighten up and turn his attention back to the woman who was watching them, her expression unreadable. He looked from her polished shoes to her perfectly styled hair. "Belle?" he asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "Is that really you?" He gestured around at the car, the driver, the whole impossible scene. "What is all this?" She took a step forward, her composure softening as she saw the raw, unguarded emotion on his face. "Yes, it's me, Leo," she said, her voice softer than he remembered, yet clearer. "And I'm so sorry it took me so long." He looked at Orion, then back at her, his mind reeling. "But how? This car, the trailer, you." He was at a loss for words. "My real name is Isabella Sterling," she said, the name offered not as a boast, but as a confession. "The woman you met, Belle, was a version of me, a lost version. I wasn't entirely honest with you, and for that, I am truly sorry." Leo just stared, the name Sterling vaguely ringing a bell from some financial news report he'd half listened to on the radio once. It didn't compute. The world of billionaire financiers and the world of dirt farmers didn't just intersect on a dusty road. "I came looking for something," she continued, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Something real. I was so tired of a world where everything and everyone has a price tag. A world of transactions." Her eyes flickered for a moment to the red sign on his gate. Her expression tightened with a flash of anger that seemed directed not at him, but at the sign itself. She saw it. She saw his failure posted for the world to see, and a fresh wave of shame washed over Leo. He felt exposed, his poverty laid bare before this woman, who represented the opposite of everything he was. He instinctively took a step back, creating distance. Isabella noticed the shift immediately. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through his shame. "I see the sign, and it's the reason I'm here. When I left, you told me kindness isn't something you pay for. You were right. But it is something you honor. And I am here to honor my promise to you." She took another step closer, closing the distance he had tried to create. "I brought your friend home," she said, her voice softening as she looked at Orion, who was now nudging Leo's hand, demanding to be petted, "and I see he's wearing a new saddle. I hope you don't mind. The old one was a bit worn. I thought he deserved the best." Leo looked, truly looked, at the saddle for the first time. It was a masterpiece of dark, supple leather, clearly crafted by an expert. It was worth more than his truck, probably more than everything he owned put together. The sheer, staggering scale of the wealth she represented was beginning to dawn on him. This wasn't just a rich woman. This was a level of affluence he could barely comprehend. And that fact made her next words all the more stunning. "He's a wonderful horse, Leo," she said, a genuine, heartfelt smile finally reaching her eyes. "He was a perfect gentleman. He taught me more in a week than I've learned in the last 10 years. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She wasn't pitying him. She was thanking him. In that moment, she wasn't Isabella Sterling, the billionaire, or Belle, the lost traveler. She was just a woman who had borrowed his horse and had, as promised, brought him home. The relief was so profound, so complete, that it left no room for any other emotion. He had bet on the character of a stranger, and against all odds, it seemed his bet had paid off. The farm might still be lost, but his faith in people, the faith his mother had instilled in him, was restored in one brilliant, blinding flash. With Orion safe beside him, a warm and solid presence anchoring him to reality, Leo felt a measure of his composure return. The world had shifted on its axis, but his friend was home. That was the only truth that mattered. He could finally face the woman Isabella and the bewildering new reality she had brought with her. "Isabella Sterling," he repeated the name slowly, testing its weight. "I think I've heard that name before." "Most people have, for all the wrong reasons," she said with a wry, self-deprecating twist of her lips. She gestured for her driver, who had been standing at a respectful distance, to remain by the car. She wanted this conversation to be between the two of them. "Can we talk, Leo? There's a lot I need to explain." He hesitated for a moment, then gave a slight nod toward the farmhouse. "The porch is the best I can offer." As they walked, the contrast between them was almost comical. He, in his dust-caked work boots and sweat-stained shirt, his hands rough and calloused. She, in her immaculate suit, moving with a quiet grace that seemed to repel the dust of the farm. Yet, as they stepped onto the worn wooden planks of his porch, she seemed less like an intruder and more like someone trying to find her way home. They sat on the old porch swing, the chains groaning softly under their combined weight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was filled with the sound of the wind sighing through the dry cornstalks. Isabella was the one to break it. She told him everything, her voice stripped of the corporate smoothness he'd heard earlier. It was the voice of Belle, honest and vulnerable. She spoke of her life in the city, describing the gilded cage with a weary detachment. She told him about Julian, not with anger, but with a profound sadness for the years she had spent confusing a business arrangement for a partnership of the heart. "He called me an asset," she said, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "And the worst part is, he was right. I had allowed myself to become one. I measured my worth by the deals I closed and the wealth I accumulated. I had a title, but no identity." She explained her frantic, aimless drive, the desperate need to shed the skin of Isabella Sterling and find out if there was anyone left underneath. "I wasn't just looking for kindness in the world, Leo," she confessed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I was testing to see if I was still capable of recognizing it, if I was still human enough to deserve it." Leo listened without interruption, his initial shock giving way to a deep, unexpected empathy. He, who had felt so isolated in his own struggles, was now listening to a woman who had been completely alone in a world crowded with people. Her wealth hadn't protected her from the most fundamental human pains of loneliness and betrayal. It had only served to insulate her, to wrap her in a beautiful, suffocating prison. When her story was finished, she finally turned to look at him, her eyes searching his for judgment. She found none. "And then I met you," she said. "And you saw a person in need, and you offered help. You didn't ask what I could do for you. You didn't calculate the risk. You just acted." She gestured toward the red sign on the gate, her expression hardening again. "And then I see this. It feels like a cosmic injustice, that a man like you should be on the verge of losing everything, while men like Julian, men who take and consume, have the world handed to them." Her composure broke for a second, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. She stood up, her CEO persona re-emerging, but this time it was in his defense. "This is a problem I can solve, Leo," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "That notice is just a number on a piece of paper. I can make a call right now, and that number will disappear. The debt will be paid. We can tear down that sign, and you'll never have to worry about this bank again." And that's just the start. This land, it's fighting you. We can invest. New equipment, better irrigation, soil analysis, anything you need. Consider it a thank you. No, consider it an apology for the week of worry I must have caused you. Just name your price. It was the offer of a lifetime. It was a king's ransom. It was the solution to every problem that had kept him awake at night. It was a lifeline, thrown from a golden ship to a man drowning in a sea of debt. And Leo shook his head. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Isabella stopped, utterly stunned. No? What do you mean no? I can fix this, Leo. I want to fix this. He stood up to face her, his height and quiet dignity a surprising match for her power. I believe you do, Isabella, he said, and his use of her real name was deliberate, and I'm grateful. More grateful than you know. But my farm isn't for sale, and my pride doesn't have a price tag. He saw a flash of hurt in her eyes, a flicker of misunderstanding. He softened his tone, trying to make her understand. You said you were tired of a world of transactions. Well, so am I. If I let you pay off my debt, what does that make this? He gestured between them. It makes you the wealthy benefactor and me the poor farmer you saved. It turns your act of returning my horse into a down payment. It turns my act of lending him to you into a lucky investment. It makes it all a transaction. And what you and I shared, what you and Belle shared, felt like something more than that. He was articulating a truth she had only just begun to grasp herself. By trying to solve his problems with money, she was reverting to her old ways. She was trying to buy her way out of a debt that wasn't financial. You already paid me back, he continued, his voice earnest. You paid me back the moment you walked down that ramp with Orion. You kept your promise. That was the only payment I ever asked for. A profound silence settled between them. Isabella looked at this man, this farmer who was about to lose everything, who was turning down a fortune out of a fierce commitment to his own dignity. He was refusing to be bought, to be made into a project or a charity case. And in that moment, her immense respect for him solidified into something deeper, something akin to awe. He possessed a form of wealth she was only just discovering, an integrity that was absolute and non-negotiable. She saw the wisdom in his refusal. It was a gift, a lesson more valuable than any she'd learned in a boardroom. He was teaching her that true partnership wasn't about one person saving the other. It was about meeting on equal ground. The tension drained out of her, replaced by a feeling of deep humility. You're right, she said softly. I'm sorry. I'm still learning. Leo saw her genuine remorse, the crumbling of her corporate armor. He saw the vulnerable person underneath, the woman who had been so lost just a week ago. And his heart, which had been guarded and wary, opened. He took a brave step, changing the subject, offering a different kind of currency. It's getting late, he said, a hint of a smile returning to his face. And I haven't eaten a real meal all day. I was just about to make dinner. He gave a small, self-conscious shrug. It's not much. Probably just some soup and bread. But if you're not in a hurry to get back to your world, you'd be welcome to stay. It was a simple invitation, an offering not of money or power, but of time, of company, of a shared meal at a worn wooden table. It was an offer of connection, pure and unadorned. For Isabella, who could have a reservation at any restaurant in the world, who could command the attention of kings and presidents, this humble invitation was the most valuable offer she had ever received. It was everything she had been searching for. Her eyes, which had been clouded with the complexities of her life, cleared. A radiant, genuine smile broke across her face, transforming her. It was the most beautiful she had ever looked. I would love that, Leo, she said, her voice full of a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I would love that very much. The inside of Leo's farmhouse was a reflection of the man himself, clean, spare, and honest. There were no frills, no decorations, save for a few faded photographs on the mantelpiece, a smiling young couple on their wedding day, a boy with a gap-toothed grin holding the reins of a young Orion. It was a space shaped by memory and necessity, not by design. For Isabella, whose penthouse was a curated gallery of modern art and minimalist furniture, this simple room felt more like a home than any place she had ever lived. While Leo moved around the small kitchen with a quiet, familiar efficiency, Isabella found herself drawn to the mantelpiece. She picked up the photo of the young boy and the horse. "That was the day my dad gave him to me," Leo said from the kitchen, his back to her. He didn't need to see which photo she was holding. "I was 16. Thought I was the king of the world." "You look happy," she said softly, tracing the faded image with her finger. "We were," he replied, a note of fond remembrance in his voice. "My parents, they believed in this place. They saw potential where everyone else just saw dirt. They believed if you put enough goodness into the land, it would eventually give goodness back." He paused, the clatter of a pot on the stove filling the silence. "I guess I'm still trying to prove them right." The simple statement held the entire weight of his life struggle. He wasn't just fighting the bank, he was fighting to keep his parents' faith alive. Isabella carefully placed the photo back on the mantel. "I think you already have," she said. He turned from the stove, a questioning look on his face. She met his gaze, her own clear and certain. "You put goodness into the world, Leo. When you helped a stranger, no questions asked. That goodness found its way back to me. Now let me help it find its way back to you. Not as a transaction, as a continuation." Leo fell silent, considering her words as he stirred the soup, its savory aroma beginning to fill the small house. Soon, they were sitting across from each other at the worn kitchen table, the same table where Leo had stared at the bank notice just days before. Now, it held 2 steaming bowls of vegetable soup, a loaf of crusty bread, and a conversation that was bridging 2 universes. The initial awkwardness between the dirt-poor farmer and the billionaire had melted away, leaving behind just Leo and Isabella. They talked for hours. He spoke of the land, not of its hardships, but of its subtle beauties, the way the light changed at dusk, the smell of the earth after a rain, the stubborn wildflowers that grew between the rocks. He described the personalities of his neighbors, the silent kindness of Mrs. Gable, the gruff pragmatism of her husband. He painted a picture of a life that was hard, but rich in ways she had never considered. She, in turn, spoke of her world with an honesty she had never afforded anyone. She described the crushing pressure, the political maneuvering of the boardroom, the deep, abiding loneliness of being at the top. She talked about her fear of never being truly seen, of always being valued for what she had, not for who she was. "It's funny," she mused, swirling her spoon in her soup. "I spent my entire adult life building an empire, acquiring companies, accumulating power. I thought that's what strength was. But the strongest thing I've seen in years was you, a man with almost nothing, giving away the one thing you couldn't afford to lose." His quiet refusal of her money had recalibrated her entire understanding of power. It wasn't about the ability to buy and sell. It was about the ability to hold on to your principles when it was hardest. As they talked, an idea began to form in Isabella's mind. It was an idea born not from her old playbook of acquisitions and takeovers, but from his story and her newfound purpose. It was an idea that wasn't about charity, but about empowerment. "Leo," she began, setting her spoon down, "when I was in Harmony Creek, I learned the town was counting on a grant to help its local farms. A grant that was just shut down by the state." He nodded grimly. "I heard about that. It's the way things are going. Big agriculture gets the subsidies. The little guys get foreclosed on." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "What if it didn't have to be that way?" she pressed, leaning forward, her eyes bright with a new kind of creative energy. "What if there was another way to fund them? A private way?" He looked at her, skeptical. "With what? People around here don't have that kind of money." "I do," she said simply, without arrogance. "But I don't have the knowledge. I don't know the difference between good soil and bad. I don't know which farmers are struggling because of bad luck and which are struggling because of bad practices. I don't know what equipment is essential and what is a luxury. I don't know this world." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But you do." The air in the room crackled with the energy of her idea. "I want to make you a different kind of proposal, Leo. Not a handout. A partnership." She laid out her vision. She would provide the capital to establish the Promise Hill Foundation, the very organization she had asked her lawyers to create. It wouldn't be a faceless entity in a city skyscraper. Its headquarters would be right here. Its mission would be to provide low-interest loans, grants for sustainable farming initiatives, and access to shared, modern equipment for the small family farms throughout the valley, starting with Harmony Creek. "I can provide the what," she explained. The funding, the legal structure, the business acumen. But I need you to be the how. You would run it. You would vet the applications. You would be the one on the ground, using your knowledge, your integrity, to make sure the help goes where it's truly needed. You would be helping your community, preserving this way of life, on a scale you never imagined. She looked at him, her expression earnest. It's a business proposal. Your farm would be the first beneficiary, a showcase for what's possible. Your salary would be that of a foundation director. The return on investment wouldn't be measured in dollars, but in thriving farms, in families that can stay on their land, in communities that are saved. It's an investment in goodness, Leo, the kind you believe in. Leo was speechless. The idea was audacious, brilliant, and utterly transformative. It wasn't charity. It was a job, a mission. It was a way to honor his parents' legacy, not just by surviving, but by helping others thrive. It was a way to take the goodness they had poured into this one small hill and spread it across the entire valley. He was still hesitant, a lifetime of self-reliance, making it hard to accept help even in this form. He looked around his small, quiet kitchen, then at the powerful, determined woman sitting across from him. She wasn't trying to save him anymore. She was asking for his help. She was offering him a seat at her table, just as he had offered her a seat at his. They would be equals. Partners. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine, hopeful smile he'd had in months. "Okay, Isabella," he said, the name feeling natural on his tongue now. "You've got yourself a partner." The handshake across the humble kitchen table was firmer than any deal signed in a boardroom. It wasn't the merger of two companies, but the meeting of two worlds. It was the beginning of a new season for Promise Hill, one built not on a foundation of debt and despair, but on the fertile ground of mutual respect and a shared audacious dream. 6 months later, the landscape of Promise Hill had been reborn. The change wasn't dramatic or ostentatious. It was deep and vital, like a parched field after a long soaking rain. The old, sagging fences had been replaced with sturdy, dark wood that traced the property with clean, confident lines. The farmhouse, once looking tired and lonely, now had a fresh coat of paint the color of warm cream, and the rose bush by the porch, long dormant, had been nurtured back to life, its crimson blossoms a vibrant splash of color against the wall. But the most significant change was in the fields themselves. The stubborn, cracked clay was gone, replaced by rich, dark soil. A new, efficient irrigation system delivered water precisely where it was needed, and a crop of organic vegetables grew in neat, thriving rows under the autumn sun. The foreclosure sign was a distant memory, replaced by a simple, hand-carved wooden sign at the end of the driveway that read, "Promise Hill Farm, home of the Promise Hill Foundation." Beside the main house stood a new, modest structure, built from local timber to blend seamlessly with the landscape. This was the foundation's office. It wasn't a place of cold bureaucracy, but a hub of community. Inside, Leo now met with other farmers, his kitchen table replaced by a large, round oak table where everyone had an equal seat. He no longer looked at his neighbors with the quiet desperation of a man on the edge, but with the calm confidence of a leader. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a mentor, a connector, an advocate. He used his innate understanding of the land and its people to guide the foundation's work. He helped the Millers down the road secure a loan for a new dairy pasteurizer, saving their family business. He organized a co-op for equipment sharing, giving 5 small farms access to a modern tractor they could never have afforded alone. He was taking the seeds of Isabella's capital and planting them with his own hands, nurturing them with his hard-won wisdom. He was fulfilling his parents' dream on a scale they could never have imagined. Isabella, too, had been transformed. She split her time now between two worlds. Half the month was spent in her New York office, where she had streamlined her empire, shedding the purely transactional assets and focusing on ventures with purpose. She had broken off her engagement with Julian in a brief, sterile phone call that felt more like terminating a contract than ending a relationship. He had protested, not out of love, but out of frustration at a failed merger. It only confirmed the wisdom of her choice. The other half of the month was spent here, at Promise Hill. She had her own small room in the farmhouse, and she traded her power suits for jeans and durable boots. She learned the names of the constellations from Leo on clear nights. She found a quiet joy in tasks she would once have considered menial, weeding a garden bed, documenting grant applications, or simply listening to the stories of the farmers who came seeking advice. She discovered more satisfaction in a progress report about crop yields in Harmony Creek than she ever had from a soaring stock market ticker. She was no longer managing assets. She was cultivating hope. This afternoon, they stood together on the crest of the hill, the same hill where Leo had once stood alone, feeling the weight of the world. The autumn air was crisp, and the setting sun cast a golden syrupy light over the valley. Below them, the farm was a tapestry of green and gold, a testament to their shared vision. Orion grazed peacefully nearby, his new saddle a dark shape on his back, a permanent reminder of the journey that had brought them all together. "Martha called today," Isabella said, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "The inn is fully booked for the fall festival. First time in 10 years, and Ben is applying to agricultural colleges. He wants to come back and work the land." Leo smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's good news." "It's more than good news, Leo," she said, turning to him. "It's the return on our investment." He looked at her, at the way the setting sun caught the gold in her hair, at the peaceful, contented expression on her face. The powerful, guarded CEO and the lost, weary traveler had merged into someone new, a woman who was strong and soft, powerful and kind. "A partner. You gave me a compass when I was completely lost," she said softly, her hand finding his. Their fingers interlaced naturally, a simple, comfortable gesture that spoke of a deep and easy intimacy. "And you," he replied, his voice full of a quiet warmth. "You gave me the resources to finally follow the map my parents left me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. They were not a story of a rich woman saving a poor man or a simple farmer teaching a billionaire a lesson. Theirs was a rarer story. It was a story of two incomplete people who, through a single act of radical kindness, had found their missing pieces in each other. He had grounded her, and she had given him wings. Their love story wasn't one of grand, dramatic gestures. It was built in the quiet moments in shared meals, in late-night conversations about soil pH and grant proposals, in the mutual respect that flowed between them as they worked side by side to bring a promise to life. It was a love as sturdy and reliable as the ancient oaks that dotted the landscape, a love that was, finally, something real. A farmer planted a seed of kindness and watched it grow into a forest of hope. He lent his horse, and in return, he found his purpose. A billionaire went searching for a place to escape, and instead, she found a place to belong. Their story reminds us that the greatest investments we can ever make are not in stocks or in gold, but in the boundless potential of the human heart. Thank you for joining us on UpStory. We hope this story brought a little light to your day. If you were moved by Leo and Isabella's journey, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. In the comments below, we would love to hear your thoughts. What do you believe is the truest measure of a person's wealth? Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep looking for the good in the world.